Welcome to the last installment for the Atheist Atrocities Fallacy. The Atheist Atrocities Fallacy is a multifaceted, multidimensional monster comprised of a cocktail of illogically contrived arguments. It is at its core a quoque fallacy employed to deflect justified charges of religious violence by erroneously charging atheism with similar, if not worse, conduct. But it is much more than this. From within its tangled and mangled edifice can be found the false analogy fallacy, the poisoning of the well fallacy, the false cause fallacy, and even implied slippery slope fallacy. Let's start with the quoque fallacy. The quoque fallacy is an informal fallacy used to dismiss criticism by means of deflection. Instead of addressing the accusation or charge, the perpetrator of this fallacy will offer an example of the opponent's alleged hypocrisy with regards to the allegation. This is precisely how Christian apologists employ the Atheist Atrocities Fallacy. To give you an example of this fallacy in action, we need only examine the reply of renowned Christian apologist Dinesh D'Souza to charges of religious violence. Quote, "And who could deny that Stalin and Mao, not to mention Pol Pot and a host of others, all committed atrocities in the name of a communist ideology that was explicitly atheistic?" End quote. Quote, "It is interesting to find that people of faith now seek defensively to say that they are no worse than fascists or Nazis or Stalinists." End quote. Christopher Hitchens. This fallacy will be often employed with the added sprinkle of one-upmanship, with the apologist using the immense scale of secular atrocities to argue that atheism is worse than religion. However, if we were to honestly calculate those victims of ritual and religious sacrifice across the entire planet, the total number of witches burned and drowned across Europe and in America, the near genocides of Pacific Islanders by the London Missionary Society, similar missionary organizations, the dismembered bodies of St. Francis Xavier's Inquisition in Goa, the disemboweled remains of Anabaptists in Europe, the men, women, and children murdered by Muslim conquerors from the Middle East to Spain, the stoned and strangled blasphemers and Christian states of the past and Muslim ones of the modern age, and all of the unmarked graves of all of the victims of religion. From the dawn of that plague to now, I am quite certain that the numbers game will prove to be an unfruitful one for the desperate apologist. This brings us to our next fallacy, the false cause fallacy. This fallacy depends upon the existence of an often minor analogous factor. In this case, the belief in God versus the lack of belief in God, God being the analogous component, and extrapolating from this minor analogy, conditions that are alleged to affect both positions. When the truth of the matter happens to be, the two, religion and atheism, are not analogous at all. For apologists to overcome the existence of this fallacy, they must show that atheism is a religion, but the very definition of atheism circumvents any such attempt. Atheism, although encompassing varying degrees of disbelief, is not a system of beliefs, but an unsystematic absence of God belief. That is all. It has no doctrines, traditions, and most importantly, no beliefs. Unless there is some secret atheist Bible from which Stalin drew inspiration for his crimes, there is absolutely no reason to suggest that his lack of belief in a supernatural deity had anything to do with his messianic and maniacal behavior. This takes us to our next fallacy in its medley of intellectual dishonest apologetics, the false cause fallacy. The fallacy of false cause occurs whenever the link between premise and conclusion depends on some imagined causal connection that probably does not exist. Example 1. Hitler, Stalin, and Pol Pot were all non-figure skaters. Therefore, we can conclude that not being a figure skater causes a person to commit atrocities. Example 2. None of these three dictators believed in the existence of leprechauns. Hence, the lack of belief in leprechauns causes people to commit atrocities. The imaginary atheist Bible is a great hypothetical answer to this fallacy, yet such a collection of manuscripts does not exist, nor do any unwritten documents that a dictator who happens to lack a belief in a god will be able to employ to commit such religious-style atrocities. In the absence of any written or unwritten atheist doctrines, the apologists must show that the lack of a belief in a god was a causal factor in the atrocities committed. However, to do so, they must conversely demonstrate that had these tyrants believed in a god, they wouldn't have committed such crimes against humanity, which brings us back to our Christian Inquisitions, Holy Crusades, missionary atrocities, and all of the other dirt directly derived from religion that this fallacy attempts to quietly sweep under the rug. Moving on to our next logical fallacy, poisoning the well fallacy. When someone presents adverse information about or associates unfavorable characteristics, or qualities with a targeted person, or in this case, worldview, atheism, with the intention of undermining it, this is known as poisoning the well. Quote, Stalin was an atheist, therefore atheism is dangerous, end quote. By associating atheism with these three villains of history, the religious apologist is attempting to throw an unjustified negative light on atheism. Aren't atheists and anti-theists doing the same thing when they associate Christianity with the Spanish Inquisition? No. The Spanish Inquisition was directly caused and inspired by the very foundations of the Christian religion, i.e. the Bible and the church doctrines and traditions. The fallacy doesn't exist when there is a legitimate association between the poison and its target. To give you a hypothetical example of this legitimate association, just imagine that John Smith has offered a friend of yours a too-good-to-be-true investment opportunity, and John has previously been convicted of fraud on multiple occasions. If you inform your friend about John's prior convictions, you're not poisoning the well, but stressing a legitimate association between the poison, fraud convictions, and the target, John Smith. Such association is certainly the case with the religious atrocities committed as a direct result of scripture, ecclesiastical edicts, tradition, and clerical authority. Next up is the implied slippery slope fallacy. The slippery slope fallacy is a species of the false cause fallacy that seeks to present a conclusion of an argument that is dependent upon an unlikely chain of events. In Hurley's concise introduction to logic, he offers the following example. Immediate steps should be taken to outlaw pornography once and for all. This in turn will gradually erode the moral fabric of society and result in an increase in crimes of all sorts. Eventually, a complete disintegration of law and order will occur, leading in the end to a total collapse of civilization. The continued manufacture and sale of pornographic material will almost certainly lead to an increase in sex-related crimes such as rape and incest. Because there is no good reason to think that the mere failure to outlaw pornography will result in these dire consequences, this argument is fallacious. The more we become secularized and the more atheism is allowed to spread, the greater the chance of such horrendous atrocities occurring will be. This is the not-so-subtle inference of the Atheist Atrocities Fallacy. I won't bore you with statistics that show societies with higher rates of atheism are generally more peaceful, have higher standards of education, health, and personal freedom, as I have already pulled the first proposition of the slippery slope from beneath the starry-eyed apologist's feet. In conclusion, so what is the Atheist Atrocities Fallacy really? It is little more than erroneous historical data wrapped in illogical argumentation and cloaked with the rhetorical garb of apologetic propaganda. Yet and still, above all this inanity, the Atheist Atrocities Fallacy is the result of a psychological defense system, the aim of which is the distortion of reality for the protection of the hypersensitive religious ego. To finish, let me now surrender and admit defeat. You look puzzled. Just lend me just one more moment to explain my surrender. Suppose the Christian apologist is correct, and atheist tyrants are worse than religious ones. What does this, from the point of view of the believer, show? What are the implications? On the one hand, you can interpret it to show that the more people believe in the Christian God, the more virtuous they will behave, despite the fact that the truth of history will laugh at such vacuous attempts to ignore its tomes of evidence to the contrary. On the other, what does this say about an all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-loving God, one who allows tyrants, whether secular or religious, to murder helpless and innocent children by the millions, who turns a blind eye to the wrongful imprisonment of innocent men and women, and who starves to bones the poor and meek. Perhaps now you see that my surrender was but a Trojan horse, in which I smuggled Epicurus' old, yet unanswered problem of evil. I guess I could have said that there is no way for a religious apologist to win this one, for if the atheist admits defeat, they still leave the faithful with the dissonance of evil, and as many theologians and philosophers have correctly concluded, free will is no answer to such evil.